After arriving in New York in 1938, Uma and Upa's first priority was to find a place to live. They rented a single room in an apartment on Fort Washington Avenue in the Washington Heights section of Manhattan. At that time, Washington Heights already had a fairly large-sized German community, and many of the Jewish refugees fleeing Germany were settling in Washington Heights. In fact, there were so many German Jewish people moving into Washington Heights that the neighborhood received the nickname Frankfurt on the Hudson. At first, both Uma and Upa had difficulty finding work. After a while, they rented their own apartment at 545 West 162nd Street. To offset their financial difficulties, they sublet one of the rooms in their apartment to help defray the cost of their rent. Upa took a few odd jobs, but due to his inability to work on Shabbos, it was not easy to find consistent work. Uma, on the other hand, while one day out for a walk, met a friend from Germany who knew of Uma's skill as a milliner and invited her to come down to the local union office. Uma joined the Milliners Union and was able to find work as a union member. Uma thus began to work in New York as a milliner and continued to do so for over 20 years. In the interim, after about 2 years, Upa Herbert was finally able to find an office job utilizing the accounting and bookkeeping skills he had acquired in Germany. He and his brother Uncle Julius worked together for the New York Pants Company until the company was sold many years later. In the frantic rush to depart from Germany in the late 30s, people would attempt to get visa papers for any country that would take them. As the United States had strict immigration quotas and laws, many people were not able to obtain direct entry to the United States. Upa Herbert's parents, Adolf and Rosa Stern, first emigrated to Holland, while Uma's mother, her brother Theo, his wife Gretel, and daughter Marion were able to get to England. Uma's sister Melly, her husband Oscar, and their sons Walter, Carl, and Peter were able to obtain passage to Ecuador, a country located in South America. As Uma and Upa tried to settle themselves in a new country with a foreign culture, they were constantly concerned for the family members left behind in Europe. News out of Europe was scarce and communication was difficult. When Uma's mother arrived in England, she sent a letter to Uma to let her know of her safe arrival. After waiting for news to reach her, Uma finally received the letter in New York on her way out to work one morning. Taking the letter along with her, she waited on the subway platform for the train to take her downtown. Holding the letter in her hand, she was just trying to open it as the train rushed by. The backwash of air from the train's passage blew the letter out of her hand, and it landed down on the subway tracks. Crushed, Uma was unable to find out any details from her mother's letter until she received another letter a while later. One of the requirements to acquire a U.S. visa was to have someone already legally living in the country to sign an affidavit taking responsibility to help the new immigrant family settle. This was not a simple process and required significant work and resources on the part of the person signing the affidavit. Uma and Upa's affidavit was signed by Upa's cousins Fred and Gretel Sucher and her parents Resha and Moritz Stern, to whom Uma and Upa were indebted the rest of their lives. Concerned for those left in Europe, Uma and Upa, however, made this a priority, and in their first years in America were able to obtain affidavits from many of their family members, including Upa Herbert's parents, Uma's mother, as well as Melly and her family. All in all, they were able to obtain over 15 affidavits and help those people to leave Europe and come to America. As was the custom in the years after World War II, grandparents often lived with their children's family. Once Upa Herbert's parents, Upa Adolf and Uma Rosa, arrived in America, they lived together with Uma and Upa in their apartment on 162nd Street. At the same time, Uma Bertha lived together with Tante Melly and Uncle Oscar. After living in New York for 5 years, Uma and Upa were blessed with their first child. On January 20th, 1943, Gloria was born, followed by Peggy, who was born 2.5 years later on April 11th, 1945. After Upa Adolf passed away in 1946, Uma Rosa continued to live with them. Uma Goldschatz was now juggling a full household. In their apartment, they allocated one bedroom to their daughters Gloria and Peggy, a second to Upa's mother Uma Rosa, and they continued to sublet a third room to an outsider to help defray the costs of the rent. Uma and Upa themselves slept in the living room, pulling beds out of the couch each night. On top of living together with her mother-in-law, as well as the mother and daughter whom they rented a room to, Uma herself continued to work as she began to raise her family. Uma's mother lived with Tante Melly's family, who by this time had a fourth boy named Frankie.